Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. I hope you had some great networking and the collaboration, and you're going to build the next best thing, right? In open source. Maybe. Yeah, show of hands.
I'm afraid the house didn't decide.
I know, 50-50. Well, half of you guys, this half, you're going to build it, right? In open source.
I always thought the best question would be, next year, can we debate the House believes that the software that the NHS builds must be open source.
So for those,
Slightly turning it around.
yeah.
So what we use is what we make.
Yeah, so for those online, the Marcus Ball was saying that should we build, anything new that we build basically should be in open source. Well, the debate next year is actually going to be about digital health education, so we'll have that debate. I'm not looking at James at all for this one. But anyway. So, yes, welcome back. I thought I'll just ask you all to look at what we have up on the board at the moment. As you may have guessed from looking at the amount of equipment I've had to buy to run this conference, I think Nadia put a social push out of how happy I was with the equipment still, though, even though it was trying to kill me this morning. I just wanted to say, if you wanted to sort of help out with what we're doing, do you like what you've seen? Have you done some great networking? Do you want to help Let's Do Digital? So that's the company that we formed in March to help run these things. So the idea has been running since 2022. Help us out by buying us some coffees. If you're interested, please get your phone out of your pocket, scan one of those QR codes. You can actually even be a member and just pay us for a coffee every month for a year if you like. Anyone that buys us 10 coffees get their name on the golden board on the front of the Let's Do Digital website. So there's a bit of a reward there as well. We're just trying to do so much, but we're asking for some money from the training courses and so on. But it's minimal, I think. But we are paying our tutors and so on. But if anyone online or here or listening to the recorded wants to help us out in any way, a coffee or more would be greatly appreciated. That's enough from me. Dion, where's she gone? There you are. Over to you.
Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Dion Matthew. I worked for the NHS for many years, happen to be living in the Netherlands now, but focus a lot on quality improvement, and a lot of quality improvement projects need digital solutions and other IT, and so I love events like this because it gives a chance to interface and understand a bit more. But enough about me. I am just here to kind of facilitate and bring you the next few speakers. And our first speaker is half of our dynamic AV team. So Simon Latimer is joining us. He has over 17 years experience within the NHS, ex-Reuters, gaming, all sorts of fun things, and has told me he's going without slides. So I'm fascinated and excited to see and love the fact that I can just listen to you speak. So welcome, Simon. Look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well fed. So I'm going to talk about game certification and the NHS, and I think why the two should meet. Actually, there's a lot of interplay here between the stuff that Marcus and Tom were talking about. I think there's a lot of actually common ground to talk about. So, as I said, I joined the NHS 18 years ago, and I got really angry, and that's probably the reason I'm still here. I arrived from two different careers prior to that, which I'll touch on in a moment. One of them which was working for Reuters, and the others in a long part of the game industry. I was appalled by the state of our trust's digital architecture, and while it's improved, it's by no means at all good. And looking at the architecture and the information estate of the NHS as a whole, I was disgusted as a taxpayer, as a patient, and as a information systems professional. I need to go back a bit further though, 25 years to when I left the city after 10 years working for Reuters and various other folks to join a startup in a games industry, dream job. I got to play games all day and got paid for it. Dungeon Keeper 2 if you're interested. It's a fabulous job, and I did that for 4 months until my boss actually discovered my CV and then said, no, you're going to work in systems now. So they dragged me away. I'm still not convinced that was a good idea, but that's what it is. So game certification, what am I talking about? So I'm talking specifically about consoles and PlayStation, Microsoft, Nintendo. The way it works is that if you want to develop a game for any one of those platforms, you go to these people, you go to Sony and say, I want to be a Sony developer. They will charge you a lot of money and look at you very carefully to make sure that you are indeed a good and proper developer. You'll get to buy the privilege of buying some very expensive development kit, some very expensive testing kit, and you'll get access to their software development kit as part of the process. It's extensive. You get all manner of art assets, all manner of sound assets, a lot of background libraries, everything you need to basically turn your PC game, typically at the time, into one that works on a PlayStation. Part of that software development kit, the core of it really is the TRC, Technical Requirements Checklist. I'd love to be able to show you one, but they are actually proprietary, so I can only talk to you in the broadest possible sense of what they actually do. It's a bit of a Bible for your development process. You need to develop the game in accordance with their rules, and they're very, very strict. And they will check. So you spend, let's say, 4 to 5 years developing your game. About 6 months before you launch it, you will ring up Sony and say, we're kind of nearly ready. And they will go, okay, we'll book you a 2-week slot here. You will not miss it. And that's where we came in. Our job basically was to help these game developers, publishers, get the game over the line, ready for publishing. It was a fun job, but stressful for them. For us, it was just very lucrative. So the process goes is that they will take the game away, and they will, with most of the development team praying, even those without any kind of religious background, everyone prays. There's a lot of money involved, and the marketing team will be very cross if you don't make the date. Hopefully, if you've done it right, the game will go out to master, and you're good. It goes on the shelves, and everyone goes and gets very, very drunk. So how does this apply to the NHS? What am I talking about here? So the basic idea is a standards-based approach to software development. Sort of a closed system, so veering on the last argument a bit, but as a general approach, it does apply in both the games development market, as well as it could, I hope, in the NHS proper. Really what I want to go to is, what do we want to do in the NHS? I was going to give a generic example to this, but I actually have a real-life one that cropped up only a few months ago. The service I work in, dermatology, we are under a lot of pressure at the moment, as you know, post-COVID. There's lots of patients, lots of being seen. And there is lots of various different providers throwing all manner of solutions at us, left and right. We had one come to us, I won't name them because reasons, and they provided an ostensibly a good product. It kind of did what it said on the tin, but it didn't plumb correctly. They didn't really understand the intricacies, shall I say, that's the polite way of putting it, about the way that data moves from primary care to secondary care, particularly in acute trust. They didn't really understand how ERS worked. They didn't really understand how PASIs worked and how those systems talk to each other or don't talk to each other, as the case may be. And whilst the software did its thing in isolation very well, it didn't plumb at all. So we ended up in doing a lot more work just to make it work, and we just ditched it. We have other projects on the go, hopefully a little bit more promising. So what do we want for the NHS? I mean, we've already talked about various different standards-based approaches to software development. I'm kind of looking at a bit more of a blue sky project that's perhaps a long way off. I hope not, please. Let's make it happen. An NHS-wide SDK, software development kit, that includes, at the tail end of the process, a certification compliance testing process. So one that at the end of the process you go, okay, we'll send the product off, and it will be tested so that the FHIR or the HO7 feeds are standardized. The kind of APIs you be are designed to order and fit. All of the various other bits of plumbing and software, the UI, the UX, should be unified and ultimately taken away as a decision that the developer makes and something that the NHS as a whole decides on how it works, and then we enforce it. We have a process. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go down the PlayStation route and say, no, you can't release it, although there probably should be some of those cases. I'm thinking more of a grading process. we star it on a UI UX and say, yes, you score very highly here, very close to what our standards are and ideals are. From a plumbing and integration process, there should be tick boxes to say these are the standards we meet and these are the processes that we've used to develop the software accordingly. Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Apple, Google, they all use development processes like these. I think we should. Thank you. Thank you, dear.
You probably heard a bit of an introduction to him already. Half of our dynamic debate team, information manager for Oxford University Hospital Trust, and also coordinates a module, I think, or a master's course at the University of Oxford as well. So welcome, Grant. Just getting mic'd up. I'm going to talk to you more about open sourcing. So I look forward to hearing your presentation.
So what I'm going to talk to you today is bringing shadow IT into the light. This comes out of my experience as somebody who is probably an exponent of what you would call shadow IT, which I'll come on to explain, and why I think it's an issue and what I think are ways of solving the problem. So I'm going to cover what shadow IT, why, the problem, and then fixing it. So shadow IT, in terms of a definition, is the use of unapproved tools, hardware or software, by employees to execute official tasks without the approval of the IT department. And in a modern vein, I got that definition from Microsoft's Copilot. And it's something that all of you in the clinical space or the operational space will be deeply familiar with. Because a lot of our services, or what's been provided by our lords and masters, just doesn't cut the mustard. And you need to solve the problems in order to make your service work efficiently. Now, and a lot of it goes on. At the best level or worst level, depending on how you think about it, you have some bright clinician who teaches themselves the code, who stands up on an amazing piece of software that absolutely perfectly meets the service need, and the clinician remains embedded, it works, it becomes so part of the consciousness of the service that people forget about it because it's that good. And then that clinician perhaps gets a promotion, gets bored, leaves, gets knocked over by a bus, and then, oh dear. All of a sudden, the organisation is left with a piece of software that only that clinician knew how to develop, work, maintain, coax, and all the rest of it, and they're left with the risks of the service literally falling over because that person has left. And there's also other issues that it raises, like significant, potentially cybersecurity risks, because clinicians who code will often solve the problem, but not necessarily think about some of those broader issues. And some do, but this is a potential issue. I've also got another definition of shadow IT, which I call the inappropriate use of approved tools, hardware or software, by employees to execute official tasks of the organisation. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean in the Excel spreadsheet. I don't know. I know it's prevalent in my organisation and no doubt hugely prevalent in yours, where basically outside the central core services, the entire service runs on various abominations of Excel spreadsheets. And the amount of times, if I had a pound for the amount of times that, oh, I've got an Excel database, I'll be a rich man, in which I usually spit the dummy and going, Excel is no database. And the problem, as most of you'll be aware, is that Excel is not a database. And Excel has a mind of its own, and people, and Excel is not designed to share. So that when your patient list, your service list is on an Excel database, you can imagine the chaos that frequently ensues. And if you've got a cloud tenant, God forbid, that then starts reinforcing things like American dates and overwrites your spreadsheets without telling you, I can see grins around the room, and many of you would have that too. So, what's the why here? Why do we have this shadow IT? And I think the basic reason why we have the shadow IT is basically the people within our organisations who are providing the digital solutions actually don't meet our needs. My trust has one of the big major EPR providers, Oracle, and prior to that, Cerner. And I've had a request for change that I think I'm now getting on to close to 8 years. It's a very simple request for change. And in fact, it's a request for change that I think they officially decided to take off the list because they admitted that they were never getting around to it. But I'm still counting because I never took it off the list. Now, the issue we've got is this is not meeting the need. And the thing is, often in our organisations, the central digital services are our only resource to basically meet the 80 or 90% of the common use case in the entire organisation. And they do that to varying degrees of wellness, sometimes good and sometimes poorly. But where it gets lost is that when you start going down the food chain to more service-specific things and you want to make a change in those particular services, that would really improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of your service, it gets lost. So what happens? You get frustrated people that need to solve the problem to make their service go better and more efficiently, and so they develop some type of shadow IT process. So what do I think is the solution to that? I think what we need are proper development teams embedded within the organisation to start solving our own problems. What I believe is that you should be embedding your developers locally and as close to the services as possible, ideally sitting in the office with the secretaries and with the consultants nearby. I believe you should offer the capabilities where you can co-develop together, where they can come literally to your door and say, I've got this problem and can you help solve it? And then you can work out together, what do they do, map it all out, then how can we add value to make that go faster and better. I think we should be using free and open source software because quite frankly, we don't more often than not have the money or budget to procure a solution. And the only way we're going to get this efficiency is by basically making it ourselves. And in that, free and open source software, I think, is the way to go. I think that in terms of the work that you're doing within your organisation, you should develop wherever possible generic kinds of solutions so that you can rinse and repeat. Take, for example, a single sign-on module. So you have another app that you've kind of spun up, so rather than your users having to remember another account to put another password in and go, well, why does it just authenticate against Active Directory? Build a module for that so that any other solution can go and take that module, use it, and they've got single sign-on. I think you should try and solve the problem as simply, keep it simple, stupid, make it as simple and as easy as possible. And what you should be doing is, if you've got a problem, try and stand up a minimal viable product that solves and gives value back as soon as humanly possible. And then what you do is you have a continual development process and you iterate and you build on that. using modern CI and CD processes. And I think finally you should banish Excel to the shadowland. Now, I speak of this, how can we do this? And often in these things, it's like, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that? What I'm saying is that we are doing it. And in clinical hematology, this is basically what we've been doing over the last few years. Do we have many solutions out in production? Not many. But have we delivered significant value in terms of trying to banish shadow IT? I think so. In one case, one of the ones we're really proud of in psychological medicine, we had some secretaries who were really struggling. They cobbled together with Excel spreadsheets a process to manage basically the phoning up of patients for a psychological assessment for people with cancer. And there was a couple of administrators who were spending 2 or 3 hours a day managing that system with a very detailed checklist to make sure that everything would be going on. The cognitive load was huge. They came to us, we worked with them, we stood up an MVP, we started, and we've started digitizing that entire process. We're not done yet. However, what we have done is already delivered immense value to that service. Those same clinicians, those same administrators now spend what was used to be 2 hours and now takes them 15 minutes. And most of that is waiting for sodding Oracle to download a report so they can ingest it. And then all they have to do is click a button, and then the rest of it is done. So that's how I would say that this is a way of being able to address and fix some of the problems that I think that we have with our various services in our trust. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Grant. Thank you very much. Again, really, interesting. And I think, the aim of this session is to really look at building on what we have. And I think you definitely demonstrated that's obviously happening in Oxford. And I will introduce our next speaker, who will also talk, I think, more about open sourcing. So again, this is Stef Piatek. He works at UCL, is a technical program director. And over to you. Slides are up there.
God, there's so many words there, aren't there? It's horrible. Sorry, that was clearly me. Bigger words, it's fine. So hi, I'm Stef. I'm at UCLH, and during this work I was at UCL, but I want to talk about building and a little bit on open sourcing EMAP, which is of course an acronym, because everything's an acronym. Love that. So it's a real-time database, or near real-time, like 20 seconds to a few minutes probably of things happening in the front, like the EHR front end comes into our database. And it's a subset of the patient data, kind of all focused around either MRN, essentially the patient, or hospital visit that they're in. And I'm going to talk to you about that. First question you might ask is, why bother? Essentially, UCLH uses Epic for its EHR, and that you can't query the back end. And there are reporting databases, but they're loaded nightly. So if you want to do anything real time, like a dashboard, AI, ML in real time, you don't really have much there, at least at the time we started. We also felt like it was really important to have a consistent data source for both real time and historic data, so you could train your model and then run it on the exact same data set, so you don't have any artifacts brought in there. I'm not going to go into huge, those colors are different, fine. Essentially, the Epic architecture sort of centers around Chronicles, which is the back end of Epic. Can't access it, fine, but it gets all of its data from other devices, other organizations, all through HL7, and there's an integration platform that UCLH maintains, and it goes backwards and forwards between there. They have a great old chat. And then on the left, you've got the nightly load into Clarity and Caboodle, which are two reporting databases that it can use. And we kind of slotted in here. Essentially, for EMAP, we got a copy of a load of the different HL7 streams, persisted them, and then we can read them in, get them into like a common format, and then our core processor updates the database with the source of truth of what's currently true in the hospital. We also got some extra HL7 feeds added in for us from Epic to feed in, so we could get more data that wasn't naturally being sent around the hospital. And then also, mostly for metadata or historical data, there's some things we just, if the HL7 feed isn't live from the start of 2019, you won't have the backfill data, so we can backfill there by querying from the two reporting databases, depending on our need. And then we have a little Hoover service that does the same thing, chucks into interchange format, and processes it. Cool. I promise that's the most technical part. And we kind of matched our tech stack, mostly for acceptability for what the IT use for their own applications. So with the view for maintenance in the future. And we really wanted to make sure our core processor was as dumb as possible, and all of the logic understanding HL7 would happen all before it got there. For those who care, part of this project as well was to try to actually be able to provision a decent compute service for development and innovation within the hospital. So we've now got a reasonable streamlined process for getting Linux VMs within the Trust network, and we can use Docker on them, so we don't have admin rights, but we can still develop. We came up with quite early on a really fun thing, that our H7 messages definitely don't come in order all the time. So we have to make sure we could receive an entire patient journey, let's say in reverse, and get the right outcome. Great fun, would recommend. Especially when we found that out. And we've been validating against reporting databases to make sure that actually we're doing what we think we're doing. And I would say sort of 99% consistency and up is sort of what we're aiming for. You'll see, I'm not going to go through all this because there's a fair bit there, but it's definitely not everything. Conspicuous things you will see that are missing there. There's not, I guess, procedures aren't in there, medications aren't in there. Some of them are quite just difficult to model in HL7, and we just never got there. We've got a decent subset to start doing some things. I just wanted to highlight a couple projects which I think we're really happy that we were able to facilitate. And this first one started off as a research project, essentially see if you could predict people in A&E, where are they going to be admitted to. And this actually has now been rolled out into clinical use. So the bed planners within UCLH get this run 5 times a day. So they actually get a real idea of we think there's this much probability of these beds being required, so they can start doing that bed planning earlier on. And for a bit of a different tact, there's the Inform Us project, which is a quality improvement project. See, there's some high-level sort of indicators. Ooh, pixelated, gross. I'll focus on pain here, and very dumbed down, but you could see if you haven't assessed the pain of those 4 people, actually we should probably be doing that. And also this person in bed 30, you can see sort of from the map of the ward, actually they're in severe pain. How can we manage that better? We've been a couple steps removed from the clinical team on this, but touching base with them recently, it's been really nice to hear how much this has actually helped the management of pain within the critical care unit and across their other things. So it's really nice to see something you've developed actually being put into real use within the hospital. Open sourcing was generally fine. We did have, in hindsight, we had a separate repository for each service, which was just a nightmare to actually maintain changes across. So part of this, we sort of merged them all in together. And we had also the great realization that Epic, the EHR provider, they view any of their tables or column names as their own IP, which means you definitely can't release that. If you're querying them, you have to give those names. So we had to rewrite some history where we did have references to it and then sort of extract out that single service so we don't have that. That's what we did, fine. Got some documentation. It exists. Code level documentation were a lot better, but high level, we have put very minimal effort in. But it exists, and you could use it, maybe. I mean, the thing is, I think if you've seen one EHR, you've seen precisely one EHR. And Epic itself is like a build your own system. So like even another Epic site using it, yeah, maybe. Like most of it's HL7, so it should be interoperable. But I've seen horrible things happen. Like, oh, we couldn't edit this one field, so we put that data in the sender application. Well, that's not the sender app. No, it's just what we could change in the interface. Like, great. Love flexible standards. Brilliant. And then also the polling service for the databases, that has to be closed source as it stands. And there's a little QR code if you want to check it out. But thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Don't go anywhere. It's question time, so I'll invite our other speakers up as well. Hopefully we all have mics. And I well, maybe we need some roving mics.
Yeah,
Roving mic, thank you. So, open to the floor, questions. Yeah, I was like,
Sorry. So the NHS SDK,
Yes.
have you scoped the funding required to build such a thing?
Oh no, this was mostly just generally a wish list for me. I've basically seen it work in various other settings, and I'm basically looking at, again, this is more of a kind of aspirational look at what I've seen done elsewhere that I think isn't a good approach that we should be doing here in some fashion or other. I think if we were to do it, you would probably have to really target and arguably I'd like it to be acute, but it would probably have to be primary care because it's a much simpler IT setup in some respects. Acute's a very different beast altogether, very balkanized and very siloized. That's a lot more work. But I think it's one of those things that, much like the elephant, you do have to take it a bite at a time rather than actually try and eat the whole thing.
My question is to Stef. Fantastic work, by the way, the secure data environment. How many users can concurrently use your system?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've never had any issues with it that were because of us. We've had like the entire database go down, but that was like infrastructure. Good question. Unsure. We've definitely had, I would say, probably about like 3 dashboards and like 2 ML, real-time ML running on it at one point. But we haven't hit that limit yet. Yeah. I guess it's up to, like how much Postgres can deal with transactions on querying.
Any other questions?
Hi. So we've obviously touched on standards in a number of different areas and ways and contexts. It's obviously really, really important. But I just wondered if each of you could comment from the point of view of standardization, because looking at it from a sort of commissioning point of view, it's more than just the digital. If you want a system to be more resilient, you might want clinicians to be able to passport between sites and so on. At the moment, there's so many barriers to actually just a clinician being able to do that. A lot of that, if there was more standardization across the system, then actually the standards problem becomes more amenable too. But I just want to, but in my view, but I'm interested in your perspectives.
Standards. I've actually experienced various versions of it. This is one of the software platforms we used in renal in my previous jobs. They are relatively widespread throughout the UK. And I had a long chat with their lead developer, and he said effectively he has to redevelop the platform for each trust he goes into. And it's not so much an architecture point of view, although that is absolutely a problem. It's sometimes actually a clinical practice problem. It's sometimes this person does these sets of jobs together, but not this job over here that this other person needs to have connected. And actually that's probably a good thing, because clinical practice should be experiment. We should be looking at different ways of doing so. But actually how we record the data and actually have that conversation across national, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I know that the Renal Registry had a really good go at this a number of years ago, but that didn't really get any real mileage, and it has been somewhat fallen flat still. I love the idea.
My thought about standardisation is that absolutely, wherever possible. The main issue we have is that we don't have an NHS, at least not from the point of provision. So we all basically cooperate under a common brand. And I think nobody argues against standardisation, but however, when each of the providers are their own independent legal entity with their own minds, this becomes deeply problematic. I mean, literally sharing data from another NHS trust with the same requirements, and it's a small nightmare. So yes, standardisation, and indeed wherever we can develop common components so it's all being tested and we're choosing it, absolutely. But I don't really think we're going to fix it much until we get a real NHS back again, where it's one single legal entity again, and then I think we'll be able to make real progress.
Yeah, I think there has been some headway in terms of standardization, in terms of, I guess, the data sharing of sort of retrospective clinical data, like OMOP, generally recommended to be sort of the standard that you should use. The fun thing is that, like, oh, what happens if you're doing, I don't know, audiology data, which doesn't really fit in there, and then you develop your own standard within the standard, or you take like FHIR, which is really great, but so customizable. Same like HL7, they're all flexible for the very reason, like, it's all actually quite different. So even within your standards, you still need standardization within that.
Yep.
And yeah, I think like there should be a lot of work done, especially like FHIR gives actually quite nice validation opportunities. Like, yeah, we can actually enforce and validate things in a shared way. But I don't know how much work has really been done in that space, and it would be a huge amount of effort.
I mean, I'm aware of there's been fairly considerable work in the UK on HR7 standardisation, but I don't think there's been any effort to actually enforce said standardisation, even though there's been various bodies that have gone and done the work, like, here is a standard and this with HR7, please go use it, and the differing trusts go, yeah, maybe, possibly, or whatever. There's been no enforcement, which is part of the problem.
Yeah, because it feels like the States is like a lot stronger line of like everything has to implement FHIR. That's it. You know, from whenever onwards it was, 2019 maybe.
Yeah.
If I can just add to that discussion, I mentioned previously that I'd worked for an organisation that was operating to a standard, which is DDS. One of the really interesting things about that standard is all about data. It's all about data sharing across systems and systems. But what was really interesting was the object management group, who is the data standard controller, mandated and required anyone building to the standard to participate in annual interoperability tests. And that's when you start to test the validity of people's implementation against standard. And so I would suggest, if you're going to have standards, look for organizations that know how to manage standards.
Sure.
And like make that a breach of contract if you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
Well, that's what they did at the OMG. They took your license, you took your ability to say you're a DDS compliant.
Just got a question on the basis of where's the money? Yeah. Now, I was talking to a fellow who was the head of IT for a university north of the border recently, and when he took on that role, his comment was there was no budget. All the budget was for keeping things going, nothing for doing anything new. Yeah. Now, myself and the team of people that I'm working with are currently at a stage 2 NIHR development of a conversational AI system using hybrid technology to deliver type 2 diabetes in multiple languages. And part of the Health Innovation Network discussion that I had, and missed the open source one, which I'll catch up on replay, was about where in the pathways does the budget get fixed? Who's saving what money, where and how? Now, separately, you've got other moving objects like ICBs and ICSs and CCGs. I think they died, blah, blah, blah.
They've gone now.
So the question that I have is, from this room full of clinicians who code and technical people who are trying to work with them without ripping them off, where's the money path? Where do we attack what and who to get to a position where innovation money is sensibly delivered to people that are listening to not just the healthcare professionals and the technologists, but the PPI folks, yeah, in different languages, yeah.
It's a really good question, and I wish I knew the answer.
The only thing I've seen locally has been like maybe the trust charity, if there is one, may well fund that type of thing. We've had some decent sort of innovation work funded by that, or sort of like large NHR grants. But yeah, I think centralized funding for that, it's hard to imagine actually being able to pull anything off of substance without that.
I mean, again, the problem comes down to each trust is its own thing. So each of them will have their own way of doing this. And in my own trust, we have an innovation, basically an innovation hub, which is nominally there for, not nominally, they do really try very hard to get external spin-ups, innovators, come in and evaluate their products and see if they can get them deployed within the trust. Sometimes they come back with venture capital money, sometimes they might come from, I think, the NHIR or other various sources, and sometimes the trust itself might, from internal innovators, just spend some of their people's time to kind of build it. But at scale and at velocity, is there anything I'm aware of where you could do this? No, but again, it's really hard to do that when each different trust is its own thing.
I think we're lucky to have got the local ICB, the BNNSG, with some of the S's in the middle, you feel slightly Shakespearean. They do have an innovation hub, and they work directly with the Department of Health and Social Care and take a percentage of the hosting budget to be able to control the flow out to other interested parties. University of the West of England, Serona Care and Health, working directly with the primary healthcare service. So I think it's one of those, you've got to create quite a complicated piece, but the piece that I think has been most valuable, and the reason why I sort of thought that I would come along and be one of the sponsors and support Mark and this community, is to remember to come with the people. It was on one of the slides earlier on. Work with the people, do the collaboration piece. I trained as an ethnographer. Did research in a virtual world in 1997, and it's that kind of attitude that we need to work out a way to get a path to money, and then the monetization of it without that data being delivered off into big technology companies. So yeah, so it's a big fight, but I think we're moving forward rather than back.
I mean, in my own trust, we're setting up a big secure data environment where our own data will be, in a sense, commoditized. No data ever leaves the SDE, but it's for generating income, precisely that.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and I think you had the first mic there. So sorry, so one more question, and then we'll wrap up before the coffee break.
I'm just going back to the standards, because you just mentioned them earlier. I work as a PRSB assessor, so Professional Record Standards Body. It's not technical standards, it's information standards. And we are having a lot of standards now which are part of if a supplier wants to go on the framework, they have to comply to some of those standards, and we're assessing them. So it's worth looking at those as much as possible when you're developing something new, and if there's a standard missing or a data set that needs creating, then come and talk to us as much as possible. Because the more we try and get clinicians to say the same thing, that data will also move through the interoperability space as well.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this session. Enjoy some coffee outside, and be back at, looking at Mark, sorry. I think 10 minutes, 15 minutes.